The winter of 1873 was the cruelest Laramie Wyoming had seen in decades, with snow piling higher than fence posts and temperatures that froze breath before it left the lungs. Quincy Lawson spotted her from atop his chestnut mare. A woman collapsed at the side of the trail, her threadbare dress offering little protection against the merciless cold, her body so still he feared he was too late. The 4 children huddled behind him on the wagon shifted restlessly. "Pa, who's that lady?" 8-year-old Martha asked, her small voice trembling with concern. "Stay put," Quincy instructed firmly, swinging down from his horse and trudging through knee-deep snow toward the motionless figure. At 32, Quincy had already lived several lifetimes of hardship. Widowed for 3 years after his beloved wife, Sarah, succumbed to fever, he'd been left to raise their 2 biological children and the 2 orphans they'd taken in during better times. His weathered face, prematurely lined from squinting against prairie sun and worry, belied his relatively young age. He approached cautiously, one hand hovering near the revolver at his hip, caution being a habit rather than an intention. The woman's face was partially obscured by a tangle of auburn hair, but he could see her shallow breaths forming delicate clouds in the frigid air. "Madam," he called. "Madam, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered, revealing striking green eyes that seemed to pierce through him despite their unfocused gaze. She attempted to speak, but could only manage a raspy whisper. Quincy knelt beside her, removing his heavy coat and draping it over her frail form. "I've got 4 young ones with me, but we can get you to my homestead. It's not far." The woman's fingers weakly clutched at his sleeve as her cracked lips parted. "I'm starving," she managed, her voice barely audible above the whistling wind. Something in her gaze, a mixture of desperation and stubborn dignity, stirred something in Quincy he thought had died with Sarah. "I can feed you," he offered simply. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Then feed me hope," she whispered before her eyes fluttered closed again. Without hesitation, Quincy lifted her into his arms, shocked at how little she weighed. He carried her back to the wagon where his children watched with wide, solemn eyes. "This lady needs our help," he explained, arranging her gently in the back of the wagon. "Martha, put that extra blanket around her. Tommy, scoot over and give her some room." 10-year-old Tommy, the oldest, nodded seriously while 6-year-old twins Eliza and James peered curiously at the unconscious woman. "Is she dead, Pa?" James asked bluntly. "No, son. She's just very cold and hungry. We're taking her home." The journey back to the Lawson homestead took nearly an hour, the wagon wheels crunching through snow as Quincy's mind raced. Who was this woman? What circumstances had brought her to the brink of death on a deserted Wyoming trail in the dead of winter? By the time they arrived at the modest 2-room cabin Quincy had built with his own hands, the woman had regained consciousness, though she remained too weak to stand without assistance. Tommy helped his father carry her inside, while Martha hurried ahead to stoke the fire. "I'll heat some broth," Martha announced with the assurance of a child who had assumed adult responsibilities too early. Quincy nodded gratefully as he settled the woman into the rocking chair closest to the hearth. "What's your name, madam?" he asked, crouching beside her. "Liliana," she murmured, her eyes growing more lucid as warmth began to penetrate her frozen limbs. "Liliana Keller. I'm Quincy Lawson. These are my children, Tommy, Martha, and the twins, Eliza and James." Liliana's gaze drifted over the children, a shadow of pain crossing her features before she masked it. "You're very kind, Mr. Lawson," she said. "I won't burden you long." "You're no burden," Quincy replied automatically, though the practicality that had kept his family alive these past years made him wonder how he'd feed another mouth when supplies were already stretched thin until spring. Martha approached with a steaming cup of broth. "Careful, it's hot," she warned, her motherly tone incongruous coming from such a small child. Liliana accepted the cup with shaking hands. "Thank you, little one," she whispered, taking a careful sip. The warm liquid seemed to breathe life back into her, and a faint color returned to her hollow cheeks. That night, Quincy gave Liliana his bed while he slept on a pallet near the hearth. In the quiet darkness, he heard her soft weeping and pretended not to notice, granting her the dignity of private grief. Morning brought heavy snowfall and the realization that Liliana would be staying longer than a single night. Too weak to travel and with nowhere to go, She became a reluctant guest in the Lawson home as December deepened toward Christmas. Gradually, her strength returned. Quincy learned she had been traveling west after losing everything: her husband to typhoid, her home to creditors, her security to the harsh realities faced by women alone in a world built for men with means. "I was headed to my cousin in California," she explained one evening as she helped Martha mend clothes by lamplight. "I had money saved, but was robbed 3 days before you found me." Quincy nodded, understanding all too well how quickly fortunes could change. Wyoming's no place to be wandering alone, especially not in winter. "I've learned that lesson quite thoroughly," Liliana replied with a wry smile that transformed her gaunt face into something unexpectedly beautiful. As days passed, Liliana integrated herself into the household rhythm. Though still recovering, she insisted on contributing, teaching Martha finer points of needlework, reading to the twins from Quincy's dog-eared Bible, helping Tommy with his arithmetic. Quincy observed the changes in his home with mixed emotions. The children bloomed under Liliana's gentle attention, especially Martha, who for the first time since her mother's death had someone to guide her feminine development. Yet he caught himself watching Liliana too often, noticing the graceful way she moved, the kindness in her eyes when she spoke to his children, the quiet strength that had sustained her through unimaginable hardship. "You're good with them," he commented one night after the children were asleep, as they sat before the dying embers of the fire. Liliana's fingers stilled on the sock she was darning. "I always wanted children," she admitted softly. "John and I tried for years, but it wasn't meant to be." "I'm sorry," Quincy said, meaning it. "Sarah and I were blessed with Tommy and Martha. The twins came to us when their parents' friends of ours died of the same fever that took Sarah 3 years back." "You're a good father," Liliana observed. "Many men would have sent orphans to an asylum." Quincy shrugged uncomfortably. "They're mine now, same as if they were born to me." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the occasional pop from the fireplace. Finally, Liliana spoke again, her voice hesitant. "When the pass is clear, I should continue to California." The words struck Quincy with unexpected force. He'd known, of course, that her presence was temporary, yet somehow the prospect of her leaving twisted something painful inside him. "There's no rush," he found himself saying. "Winter's long here. Spring won't come until May, sometimes June." Liliana's eyes met his, something unspoken passing between them. "I wouldn't want to impose." "You don't," he replied simply. Christmas approached, and with it, a rare break in the weather. Quincy took advantage of the clear skies to ride into town for supplies, returning with not only flour, coffee, and beans, but small treasures hidden in his saddlebags: peppermint sticks for the children, a length of red ribbon for Martha, and tucked carefully away, a small bottle of rose-scented water for Liliana. The children's excitement over the candy was expected, but Liliana's reaction to his modest gift caught him unprepared. Her eyes welled with tears as she uncorked the bottle and inhaled the delicate fragrance. "It's been so long since I've had anything beautiful," she whispered, looking up at him with such gratitude that Quincy felt his heart expand painfully in his chest. That night, after the children had hung their stockings with hopeful anticipation, Quincy found Liliana sitting alone at the small table, sewing by candlelight. "You should rest," he suggested, settling into the chair opposite her. She smiled without looking up from her work. "I'm nearly finished." Curiously, he peered at the fabric in her hand, scraps of cloth transformed through her skilled fingers into small, crude toys. A rag doll for Martha, fabric soldiers for the boys, and a tiny calico kitten for little Eliza. "Where did you get the material?" he asked. "I unpicked the hem of my petticoat," she admitted. "I couldn't bear for them to have nothing on Christmas morning." Quincy swallowed hard against the lump forming in his throat. This woman who had nothing was giving what little she possessed to bring joy to his children. "Liliana," he began, then faltered, uncertain how to express the tumult of feelings she'd awakened in him. She looked up at last, her eyes reflecting the candlelight. "Yes. I'm glad you're here," he said simply, the words inadequate to convey what he truly meant. Her smile was soft, tinged with something like longing. "So am I." Christmas morning dawned bright and cold. The children's delight at finding their stockings filled with peppermint and Liliana's handmade toys filled the small cabin with more warmth than the crackling fire could provide. Quincy watched as Liliana received Martha's enthusiastic hugs, taught the twins a clapping game, and admired Tommy's proud display of how his fabric soldiers could stand upright. Something had shifted between them, an unspoken possibility hovering in shared glances and fingertips that lingered when passing dishes at meals. January brought brutal storms that confined them to the cabin for days at a stretch. Cramped quarters might have bred resentment, but instead forged deeper bonds as they passed the time with stories, songs, and games Liliana remembered from her own childhood. One night, after a particularly fierce blizzard had finally abated, Quincy found Liliana standing on the porch, her breath forming clouds in the moonlit air. "You'll catch your death," he admonished gently, draping a blanket around her shoulders. She didn't turn, but leaned slightly into his presence. "The stars here are different from back east. Closer somehow." Quincy followed her gaze upward to the vast canopy of stars, brilliant against the black Wyoming sky. "It's one of the things I love most about this land. Makes a man feel small and significant all at once. I never expected to find beauty in such a harsh place," Liliana murmured. "Beauty's often where you least expect it," Quincy replied, his eyes not on the stars but on her profile, silvered by moonlight. She turned then, her expression vulnerable in a way he hadn't seen before. "Quincy, I don't know what I'm doing here." "You're healing," he answered. "You're living. And when I'm healed, when spring comes." Her questions hung between them, laden with implications. Quincy took a deep breath, the cold air burning his lungs. "Do you still want to go to California?" Liliana's eyes searched his. "I don't know anymore. I only know that for the first time since John died, I feel like I might have a future worth living for." Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Quincy reached out to brush a strand of hair from her face. "I never thought I'd feel this way again after Sarah. Didn't want to, truth be told. And now," she whispered, "now I'm wondering if sometimes life gives second chances to those who've lost their way." Her hand came up to cover his where it rested against her cheek. "I was dying when you found me. Not just my body, but something inside me. You asked me to feed you hope," Quincy recalled, his voice rough with emotion. "You have," she replied softly. "You and those precious children. You fed me more than I dared dream possible." The kiss, when it came, was tentative at first, the hesitant meeting of two people who had known profound loss and feared risking their hearts again. But as Liliana's arms slipped around Quincy's waist and his hand cradled the back of her head, the kiss deepened into something that felt like coming home after a long, treacherous journey. February passed in a blur of short, bright days and long nights filled with conversation as Quincy and Liliana cautiously rebuilt their trust in the possibility of happiness. The children, intuitive as always, sensed the change between the adults, though no words had been spoken about the future. It was Tommy who finally asked the question during supper one evening. "Are you going to marry Miss Liliana, Pa?" Quincy choked on his coffee while Liliana's cheeks flamed scarlet. "Tommy," Martha hissed, mortified by her brother's directness. But Quincy, recovering his composure, saw an opportunity for honesty. "I haven't asked her yet, son. But you want it, don't you?" Tommy persisted. Quincy's eyes met Liliana's across the table. "Yes," he said quietly. "I do." "Then why don't you?" Little James asked, practical as always. "Because it's not that simple," Quincy explained. "Miss Liliana might have other plans. She was headed to California when we found her." For pairs of children's eyes swiveled to Liliana, who set down her fork with deliberate care. "I was going to California because I had nowhere else to go," she said carefully. "But now you could stay with us forever," Eliza suggested hopefully. A smile tugged at Liliana's lips. "Would you like that?" For enthusiastic nods answered her. "And you?" she asked, looking directly at Quincy, a challenge in her gaze. Something about her courage, always her courage, moved him deeply. He rose from his chair, came around the table, and to the delight of his children, knelt beside Liliana's chair. "I had a speech planned," he admitted ruefully. "Was going to wait for spring, do things proper." "Since when have either of us done anything the conventional way?" Liliana asked, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Quincy took her hands in his. "Liliana Keller, You came into our lives like a miracle when we'd stopped believing in such things. I know it's soon, and I know you had other plans. But if you could see your way clear to becoming my wife and a mother to these children, I promise to spend every day trying to deserve the blessing of your love." Liliana's tears spilled over at last. "You found me dying and gave me life," she whispered. "Of course I'll marry you." The children erupted in cheers as Quincy rose to take Liliana in his arms, sealing their promise with a kiss that held all the hope of their shared future. They were married 2 weeks later by the circuit preacher who happened through town. The ceremony simple but heartfelt in the same cabin that had witnessed their growing love. The children stood as witnesses, solemn and joyful by turns, as Quincy and Liliana exchanged vows and plain gold bands that had been hastily procured from the town jeweler. Spring arrived early that year, the snow melting to reveal tender green shoots pushing through the soil. Liliana planted a garden with Martha's eager help, while Quincy and the boys repaired fences damaged by winter storms. The cabin that had once felt cramped now seemed expansive with love, filled with laughter that had been absent for too long. On a warm evening in late May, Quincy found Liliana sitting on the porch steps, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Lawson," he said, settling beside her. The name still brought a smile to her lips. "I was thinking about the day you found me," she admitted. "How close I came to dying alone in the snow." Quincy took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "God's providence," he murmured. "Do you think so?" she asked. "Sometimes I wonder why I was spared when so many others aren't." "I don't claim to understand God's ways," Quincy replied thoughtfully. "But I'm grateful every day that you were the one I found on that trail." Liliana leaned against his shoulder, her body fitting perfectly against his side. "I've been meaning to tell you something," she said, her voice holding a note he couldn't quite identify. "What's that?" She took his hand and placed it gently against her abdomen. "We're going to have a baby." Quincy's breath caught as the significance of her words registered. "A baby? Are you certain?" Liliana nodded, watching his face anxiously. "Are you happy about it?" "Happy?" Quincy repeated, incredulous. "Liliana, Words failed him, so he gathered her into his arms instead, his embrace conveying what language could not. When he could speak again, his voice was rough with emotion. "When I found you that day, you asked me to feed you hope. I never imagined that you would give me so much more in return. We've fed each other," Liliana murmured against his chest. "Love, hope, purpose, all the things that make life worth living." That night, as they lay together in the darkness, Quincy's hand resting protectively over the place where their child grew, Liliana spoke the truth they both knew. "We saved each other, didn't we?" "Yes," Quincy agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "And we'll keep on doing it, day by day, for the rest of our lives." Autumn arrived with golden light and crisp mornings, and with it came their daughter Rose Lawson, named for the scent that had brought tears to her mother's eyes on a long-ago Christmas. The children adored their new sister, taking turns holding her and arguing good-naturedly over whose turn it was to help with her care. On Rose's 1-month birthday, Quincy surprised Liliana with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" she asked, bouncing Rose gently in her arms. "Open it and see." Inside was a journal bound in soft leather, its pages blank and waiting. "For our story," Quincy explained. "So Rose and any brothers or sisters who might come along will know how their family came to be." Liliana's eyes filled with tears as she traced the embossed initials on the cover. "It's perfect," she whispered. That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Liliana sat at the table with a pen in hand, the journal open before her. After a moment's consideration, she began to write. In the winter of 1873, a cowboy with 4 children found a woman starving by the side of a snow-covered trail. "I'm starving," she told him, and he promised to feed her. "Then feed me hope," she replied. Neither of them could have imagined that from those desperate beginnings would grow a love strong enough to heal old wounds and create new life. Quincy came to stand behind her, reading over her shoulder. His hands rested on her shoulders, warm and reassuring. "Is that how it happened?" he asked softly. Liliana looked up at him, her face illuminated by lamplight. "It's how I remember it." He bent to kiss her, a tender gesture that still held the power to quicken her pulse. Right at all, he murmured against her lips. Every moment that led us here. It might take a lifetime, she warned him, smiling. Good, Quincy replied. That's exactly what I'm counting on. Outside, the Wyoming night spread its star-filled canopy over the Lawson homestead. Inside, wrapped in the warmth of family and love that had been forged through hardship and hope, Liliana continued to write their story not just for their children, but as testimony to the resilience of the human heart and its capacity for renewal even in the harshest wilderness. For a woman who had once begged to be fed hope, Liliana Lawson now had abundance beyond measure: love, family, purpose, and the precious gift of a future stretching before her like the endless prairie sky. And in that space between despair and deliverance, she had found not just survival, but a life worth living, a love worth cherishing, and hope that continued to nourish them all with each new day.